Backseas Musical Podcast.
Resistance is useless!
In 1981, exactly 40 years ago, the band D.O.A. out of Vancouver, British Columbia, released one of the most influential albums of the decade called Hardcore 81. This album and the band are important for a number of different reasons. First of all, D.O.A. were the first band to impose the term hardcore to the new subgenre of punk music. In hardcore, bands like D.O.A., Black Flag, Minor Threat, Bad Brains, and the Dead Kennedys were kicking it up a few notches with speed, volume, aggression, and more provocative lyrics. But D.O.A. wasn't just a label maker. D.O.A. was something entirely different. Yes, they included all the elements that define hardcore, but they also perfected the do-it-yourself approach that existed in punk since the 70s, but never to this degree. The original 1978 D.O.A. lineup included drumming legend Chuck Biscuits, bass player Randy Rampage, and today's guest, Joe Keithley, who was known by his stage name as Joey Shithead. But what you're about to find out in just a few minutes is this man was no shithead at all. Joey was not only the founder of the band's independent label Sudden Death Records, he would front the band for the next 43 years, releasing dozens of their own records, EPs, and singles. They also created a sophisticated network amongst other bands that provided the names of clubs and towns that were safe to play in, and ones that were not. They also provided the names of clubs where you could expect to get paid, and which ones you would not. They also connected bands with the names of hardcore fans that were willing to offer a couch to sleep on. Remember, this was before email, before the internet. They didn't even have fax machines back then. Yet it was an essential piece in spreading hardcore throughout the rest of North America and beyond. What D.O.A. had and continues to have was an endless, relentless work ethic, guided by a mission statement that simply said, talk minus action equals zero. But it doesn't stop there, because D.O.A. has actively supported a series of political causes over the years, including anti-racism, anti-censorship, and a number of environmental issues, and many, many more. In other words, D.O.A., and especially Joey Shithead, have always put their money where their mouth is, in a manner of speaking. In 2018, Joey Keithley, who is now 65 years old, was elected to the city council in his hometown of Burnaby, British Columbia, a city of nearly 250,000 people. It's a position where he not only expects to run for re-election, he's also putting his words into action, just like the D.O.A. motto. And like I said, this is the 40th anniversary of the D.O.A. album Hardcore 81. And the album has been given a limited edition vinyl release that includes 3 bonus tracks, a 12-page booklet, and it comes in red vinyl. The band is going on the road on a West Coast tour, playing the entire album from front to back. This is my conversation with the leader of D.O.A. and Burnaby City Councilor Joe Keithley, Joey Shithead, on Backseas Musical Podcast.
Yeah, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Sorry about the mix up earlier. I had one.
Well, I figured, you got a band to run, you got a record to re-release, you got a tour on the horizon, plus you're running the city all at the same time. I figure
I'm a little busy.
Yeah, just a little bit. I do want to say though, it's a real pleasure to talk to you because I've been a fan for a long time. Even have my my beat the shit copy of of Hardcore 81.
Okay.
40 years ago, this thing comes out, and it's always been one of my favorite hardcore records. Tell me about the updated, the new release, the new version. It sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah. So that just came out on my label. So people can find that suddendeath.com or record stores, whatever. So added 3 bonus tracks. So we took the early singles, Disco Sucks, which from 78, the Prisoner version, the single, as opposed to one song, the Something for a Change album. And then so I thought the bookend really was adding Fucked Up Ronnie, because like Fucked Up Baby's on Hardcore 1, but everybody knows Fucked Up Ronnie. And then later on, we did a single, Fucked Up Donald. We sang it, Fucked Up Thatcher. That song's been like pretty universal. Like I think I wrote that when I was about 18, and it says "Served me well" since then, right? So it's kind of like Willie Nelson wrote a song that he's still playing 60 years later type thing. So we put Fucked Up Ronnie at the very end. So it's the same mix pretty well, but just different lyrics. So it's a pretty fine, and that kid. So I did that. And then the coolest thing though is there's a 12-page booklet that comes with the LP version. And so I wrote like, I don't know, 2,500 words on D.O.A's take of the origins of hardcore. And then we found a bunch of pictures that people had never seen before. And my drummer, Patty Duddy, is a graphic designer. So he put together the booklet. So, yeah. So, and anyways, I think it's a nice thing for the fans that they can take a look and get our take on it.
Well, to me, it's always been, an important record for a lot of different reasons. I mean, not just the story of it, labeling the genre of hardcore, but it's also the record, or one of those records that, inspired a lot of people to start their own bands and kind of take control of their own destiny doing it the way you guys did, which I always thought was the most important and intriguing part of the D.O.A. story.
Yeah.
Is the DIY aspect.
Yeah, I think you got a really good point there, because when people think, well, what was punk rock's biggest contribution? Was it musical style? Was it, as some people really in the early days that focused on fashion? I'm talking way back in the Sex Pistols, early era when I was still a teenager and heard those guys. But I think the biggest thing was that people thinking that they could do it yourself. And enabling people started labels, they started magazines, they started their own businesses, and tried to at least minimize the amount of big corporations they're dealing with. I mean, you're still shipping stuff through UPS or through the post office or whatever, right? I mean, but I think punk rock's we can do this ourselves attitude. I think that's the biggest contribution that it made to society.
I read Keith Morris wrote a book a few years ago from the Circle Jerks, and one of the things that he talked about in the book was D.O.A. was kind of like its own network, where they would kind of go through you guys to figure out, all right, well, which club is okay to play in, which ones am I going to get paid, what communities will have us, what fans can I sleep on their couch. I mean, it all seems to kind of run through D.O.A. at a time before the internet or email. And to me, that's the really fascinating thing, is how you kind of connected the map of North America to hardcore.
Yeah, it was an interesting process. Like when I first started, we started even in the Skulls, not to be confused with the Skulls from Los Angeles, but we had a band, Dimwit Wimpy, Simon Werner, who later played in the Pack in England, and myself. We had a punk rock band, 77. And so between what we do with that and also with D.O.A., we go to the local music shop, and we didn't have money for magazines or anything like that. So I'd sit in the back of the magazine, write down the addresses. And when we finally got a D.O.A. single out, I'd get a letter. I send them the Disco Sucks single, and I had the letter said, and they weren't photocopy. I wrote everyone individually. Hi, we're a punk rock band from Canada. We'd like to come and play in your town. Do you have any ideas, or whatever I said, right? And I'd have to wait for the letter to come back with a reply. Oh yeah, you could come and play in this town, type thing, right? So, and I think, say, young people today couldn't even conceive that you would write a letter to. I mean, the first big tour we did in Europe, I was just on the phone talking to a guy about this interview about this. That we went in '84 and did like 2 months of shows over Western Europe, and in Poland and Yugoslavia behind the Iron Curtain type thing. And that tour originated, a guy in Poland sent us a letter, said, "Hi, I'm so and so. We put on shows. We heard your song General Strike. Would you like to come and play in Poland?" And we wrote him back a letter. Yes. What month could? So it was like so slow, right? But eventually we got there and played, right? But I'm getting a little bit off topic, but it's like to think, yeah, you just went and found out who would rip you off and who wouldn't, and pass the word around, right? And I actually exchanged a lot of information with Chuck Tukowski from Black Flag, because they were touring like crazy as well too, right? So Chuck and I would confer about like, oh yeah, don't go to a bow guy in Sacramento. I think it's called Can't Tell Productions, because there's always, you can't tell what the fuck you're going to get paid. So yeah, it was pretty fun, and we were like really adventurous. Like we got a van. Randy got a van, a real piece of crap, and we drove that California to 79 to Texas to Chicago to New York and then Eastern Canada like Ottawa and Toronto, right? I mean, that tour was so poorly planned. We had our last show was in Toronto. Then was that 3,000-mile drive back to Vancouver. Now, that's how the tour was laid out. But we got a little bit better as time went on.
One of the things that's when you hear people talk about the band D.O.A. and it's like from Keith Morris to Henry Rollins and a few other people that I've talked to, it's like they all say the same thing, that D.O.A. was. And maybe it's because you guys were just playing so much or just the intensity that you played, but that there were people who were citing that D.O.A. live was like a life-changing experience. And these are musicians saying this. It's not just the normal fan, who has, a copy of the record or whatever it is. I mean, these were musicians that said, D.O.A. was something really special, kind of like, the way Bad Brains was really special when they played live.
Right. Yeah, I've heard people say that, but that's a pretty nice compliment, obviously, especially coming from the people you mentioned. And we just took it when we were in, I think it was mid-1977, and we hadn't even really started playing punk rock at all, but we knew about it. And then the Ramones came to town, and they'd sold 2 tickets for a club that held 1,100. So they made a free show. At the pre-show, only about 100 people showed up, which is, of course, about the only people in Vancouver that knew anything about punk rock, right? And they played for about 30 minutes, played the first album, front to back, went off stage, and I can't remember if they played an encore. And the 100 I was at when it was over, the lights came on, we all looked at each other like, oh, so that's what punk rock is. Okay. And that was the book that me and my friends took to heart, and we went, this is how these guys do it. This is how we're going to do it, with like, not quite the same thing, but like how they would jam all the songs together and which increased the intensity, which was different. And we just tried to up that. I mean, obviously we played faster than the Ramones, so it was like not obviously not better. Those guys are the tops in my books, but maybe a little bit more intense at points type thing, right? So yeah, so. It was just that we came along with right time, right place too, right? So I think that's part of it. And we had a really great lineup. I mean, Chuck and Dave and Randy were great, right? So yeah.
I just remember back in the 80s, having a lot of friends who were into the scene, and I remember that their parents just thought it was the worst possible thing that a kid could do. They'd almost rather see the kid straight on drugs than turn into a punk rock fan. And
yeah.
I mean, I remember like a Phil Donahue show, and I think Jello Biafra was on the stage.
I saw that.
Yeah, and it's on YouTube. It's actually funny to watch because if anyone took the time to listen to a Jello Biafra or anybody else on the stage talking about it, they were I remember there was a specific friend of mine who was straight edge, and he was trying to explain to his parents what straight edge was all about, and his parents were horrified. Today, I'd be thrilled if my kids came home and said, "Dad, we're going straight edge." I mean, it's just such a different time.
People were mystified, but I remember there was like guy's name was Tom Jeffries, and he was the most popular DJ on the biggest station in Vancouver. And he always talked shit about punk rock, and they would never play it, right? It's like they just wanted to play Loverboy and these bands, and so. Somebody sent him our live record, Triumph of the Ignoroids, right? And so we got word that he was going to play our record on this show in the biggest station in Vancouver, 5:00, drive home type thing.
Right.
And he goes, we got this new record by D.O.A. called Triumph of the Ignoroids. And he put it on, and it went for about 10 seconds. They made the needle skip across the thing. And he took it off, and he says, folks, remember, punk rock is junk rock. And I never did run into the guy to settle the score, but it would have been kind of unpleasant for him.
But you probably got more publicity out of not getting played than if you had gotten played.
Absolutely. Hey, then we had this one show just a little bit later, probably 86, and oh my God, yeah, David Lee Roth had been kicked out of Van Halen, but he had a big record out, was filling hockey arenas, right? 15,000 people.
Right.
And Poison was supposed to be there. Poison was the opening act, but the guy had broke his ankle in Calgary. So they called us to have D.O.A. to sub in for Poison. It was great.
Oh.
We played, and some people liked us. We had a pretty good chorus of booze going, and I got in an argument with David Lee Roth's manager. After we played, they chucked us all out of the back of the building, and we never did see David Lee Roth play. And that's how you happen when you're obnoxious punks, right? So
that's right. What was that scene in Vancouver like? Because I mean, I've heard stories. A lot of people don't even consider that Canada really kind of was this fertile ground, but Vancouver specifically did have a pretty strong scene. You and the Subhumans. What was that scene like, and how different was it than, say, other areas of the States, like Los Angeles, for example?
Yeah, I think the thing about Vancouver was like a real backwater, right? It's grown a lot in the meantime, but in those days there was no music industry, so there's no record companies, anything like that. So the music industry was in London, New York, LA, and Toronto. As far as we were concerned, and so that kind of influenced, because I think bands in those bigger metropolises would kind of do stuff to get them signed to a record label, where the bands in a backwater like Vancouver would kind of do stuff just to be different and to attract attention, right?
Right.
And I think that's why we end up with a scene that, like I said, D.O.A., Subhumans, Pointed Sticks, Modernettes, the Dish Rags, You Jerks. Some of these bands are not that well known, but it was a pretty vital scene, right? And one of the fun things about it was that it had a lot of variation, but like the early shows, we'd have a punk rock band, an experimental noise band, a new wave band maybe, and a reggae band. And that was kind of like your perfect shows, because it was all the types of culture that were not popular in the mainstream.
Right.
Stuck together, right? So, and I thought those were kind of the funnest shows. And then later on, by the mid 80s, and hardcore shows became much more all hardcore bands type thing, right? So, which has its merits, and it's also it has its weaknesses too, right? In a sense, depending on what you're into. But the thing was like a really creative thing, and people did get out there and travel a bit, like D.O.A. obviously the most. The Subhumans got famous for two reasons. One, because they're really good and have a bunch of great songs. And they also traveled. They followed D.O.A.'s footsteps. And one of their manager was a friend of our manager, so we trade information type thing. And the Point Six got out there too, because they went to the UK, they went to California, so they got, they're not super well known, but like a good band that got creative following because they were adventurous enough to leave their hometown. And for us, the big key was to instead of going to Toronto, which would be kind of a natural thing for Canadians, we decided to just go to California all the time. So we were going to California 5-6 times a year, and we became friends with all, like with Keith and all these different people, like Bad Religion. That was a little bit later when they got going, but anyways, the main people in the scene there, and they're just going, up, hey, can you guys come down next week and do the show? And we just go, sure, why not? What else are we doing?
You guys have never shied away from making political statements in your music. I think anyone that knows D.O.A. well enough is aware the motto "talk minus action equals zero," which I think is maybe a brilliant statement for many people to follow. But over the course of years, you personally have gotten more involved in politics, and now you're a city councilor in your hometown. Was there a stigma against Joey Shithead running for city council? Because I mean, all I can think of is the lawn signs. I mean, I always thought that the states had cornered the market on shitheads in politics. It's nice to know that we're not alone. But what was the reaction of people when you said I want to run for this seat?
Yeah, well, they're just going to slogan for a second. I mean, I always said, listen, you always vote for shitheads, so why not Joe Shithead? You know what? Like 20 years ago, I wouldn't have got elected. And I did try running. My first attempt at election was in 1996. I ran for the Green Party. for the provincial legislature in British Columbia, right? So like the second level of senior government here in Canada. And I came in fourth out of six or something. I got 500 votes, so I thought that was better than nothing, right? So,
Right.
But it's pretty meager. I think the winner had 15,000 or 18,000, right? So, but I think when I would go around a few years ago, because I ran 6 times, so maybe like let's say even 5 years ago, I still get people going like, "Oh, hey, where's your mohawk? Where's your leather jacket?" And I said, "Oh, I'm actually wearing a suit today," right? So this is a kind of, I think the real key was that D.O.A. really helped me get elected, and wasn't because people, because I knocked on like 10,000 doors, right?
Right.
Like a lot of door knocking, a lot of individual contact, and people go like, "Oh, you're the guy from the band," and that didn't mean they were fans, although there were a few people went and got their LPs. I signed, blah blah blah. I knew I had their vote for sure, right? So. But they were like, they respected my stance and the band's stance on different issues that were important on the environment, on fighting weapons proliferation, fighting racism, fighting for women's rights, so on and so forth, like D.O.A. has always done. And they got it that I was committed to these ideas, even though I'd spent my entire adult life playing in this crazy punk rock band, right? They went, "Oh, this guy's actually serious." So the band that was a major step in getting me elected, right? So
I mean, I'm trying to imagine, had you run in the 80s when there was so much resistance to punk rock and to punk rockers and feeling like you were destroying society by your music, when in fact the opposite is true. You've probably informed more people as a result of your music than turned them away from what was going on in the world.
yeah, I would think there's one real classic example. There's this area called the Stein Valley. It's about 200 miles north of Vancouver, and it was like it was the last unlogged watershed in British Columbia. And British Columbia is huge. It's like bigger than Texas, right? Put it that way. And there's a lot of trees here. But logging industry it's like Oregon and Washington. It's been a mainstay here for like 120, 130 years, right? So we're trying these hippies and Earth First type people got us D.O.A. up to play this Stein Valley benefit, to try to stop the logging there. And the townspeople were so outraged at us. They were threatening us with chainsaws and stuff like that. Let's send these turkeys back to Vancouver type thing. And then it was like, and it got on like a big time news in Vancouver coverage because people were like threatening us and stuff like that. That was a big issue that everybody knew about. The next year, it was all good. They had a festival that the government organized. John Denver played, and the forest was safe. But when the punks were there, it's just like, who are these dirty, rotten, no good? The next year they have a nice, friendly, folky country guy, right? And that happened a few times. They were fighting this weapons proliferation march across the Burrard Bridge in Vancouver, one of the main bridges there, and the city stopped the march. And I thought, no, I don't want to, because we had this like peace concert, like in this park. And then they said this is a terrible thing, these punks. The next year, they had a big march. It was led by church groups, the mayor, and all sorts of union groups. Oh, this is good, this peace march, But a year earlier, it was no good. We were, same thing. I'm just going like, okay, these people don't know what the fuck they're talking about, right? It's like, just because punks are always ahead of their time, right?
They really
not just lots of people were they talking about stuff because they were like pretty heightened and aware of how fucked up society was, right? And that's why you get songs like "Smash the State," and now I am an elected city councilor, right? So,
I can only imagine what it must be like when you and Jello Biafra sit down and just start talking about politics. It must be conversations that must go on for literally hours.
Yeah, he's a real talker, as you know. Right? So,
yes,
for sure. If you watched What Would Jello Say, I think that's what his show is called. It's cool. That's good. I mean, and I think So that, because there's people like, or you get bands like that are really politically focused, like Propaganda, really good band, like, the next generation after Jello and I.
Yeah.
And I think, but other bands were also like pretty political, but were not as overt, right? There's different ways to show your politics, right? A lot in the early days was like, suburban angst. And to me, that's political as well, right?
Yep.
So there's a lot of different ways of expressing that. So sometimes you can be long-winded about politics, but it's also good to have fun too.
I interviewed Jello, and I think we got 25 minutes into the conversation where I was finally able to ask my second question. So, yeah, dude can talk. I know you don't have a whole lot of time, and I know there's a plan to tour with the re-release of the record, but it's mostly in Canada and in the Northwest, right?
That's just before Christmas. We're having all sorts of problems with COVID restrictions here in BC, just the capacity.
Yeah.
So clubs that held 300 are now like 150, and people got to sit down. So we're just considering if we're going to do all that. But we do have scheduled, I hope it happens February, down Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Arizona. And then in April, we're talking about going to Colorado through there, Salt Lake down to Texas for a couple of weeks. So we'll see if we get out to, because you're in Springfield, Mass, right?
Yes.
Okay. We'd love to get out there again. I'm not sure if it's going to happen this year. Later on next year, I'm up for re-election. So by about June, the focus will change to that. We'll still do some shows, but it won't be any big long tours.
Right.
We're supposed to go to Europe next summer. So play at it's the 25th anniversary of Rebellion there in Blackpool. We were supposed to play this last summer, right?
Right.
Obviously they got canceled, right? So or postponed. So we're on for that. So we're trying to fit in as many places as we can. We'd love to get out to Boston, out to Philly, New York. All that's great stomping grounds for us, right? So, and we've got lots of great memories in Boston. It was like one of the key towns for D.O.A. and the craziest fucking people in the audience, right? Right?
That's why yeah, no kidding. But I would love to see you guys back out here. It'd be wonderful to see D.O.A. again.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
Yeah.
And when we do play, we're gonna, even though it's going to be at that point, 2022, we will play Parkway 1 front to back, and we'll do more than that because that'd only be an 18-minute show, right? People go, refund, fuck you guys. And that'll be the first time we've ever done that. So we've been practicing and we're on top of it. So, but we're going to keep doing that next year because everything obviously is because of COVID, right? So, yeah.
That's great.
Well, I think it's the 40th anniversary, even though it would be the 42nd anniversary, right? So.
Well, Joe, it's a real pleasure to talk to you, and congratulations. 40 years is a real milestone.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, and thanks for the support. And whenever you get the podcast on, let us know. We'll put a link up on Sudden Death homepage and all that. Right?
We will. Absolutely. Thank you, Joe.
Okay.
Take care.
Cool. Okay, take care.
Not every day you get to hear from two shitheads at the same time. I'm just glad to play my part. Again, the reissue of D.O.A.'s Hardcore 81 is out on Sudden Death Records. Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed it, feel free to share it, like it, give it a good review, and feel free to follow our updates on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can always reach out to me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening to Baxi's Musical Podcast.